All right. First of all, I apologize if I start coughing. I've been having an allergy problem, but hopefully all will be well. I'm Zoe. I have 2 kids. The Fierce Bear is my daughter, and the Ninja Spider-Man is my son. And you probably can't tell, because I'm so thin, but I'm pregnant with my 3rd. So babies have been on my mind lately. And the best advice that I got from my childbirth and baby care class that I took many years ago is to experiment on your babies. Not like this, of course. What my teacher actually meant is that they're all different. So what works for one doesn't work for all of them. Parenting is basically just, you try something, you see if it works, and if it doesn't work, you just try something else. For example, that's how we found out when my daughter was a toddler that she slept best listening to a recording of birds tweeting super loud. No expert told us this. We just figured this out through trial and error because there's no one right answer. That's why there are so many parenting books and advice blogs. I actually looked up the history of parenting books, and they've been around since the 1600s. And now we have over 73,000 of them for sale on Amazon.com. And yet we still don't have perfect children with all these hundreds of years of advice. It's the same way with digital design and development. It's a slightly newer field than parenting, but we already have accumulated thousands of expert opinions. And despite all these experts, websites and apps are still not perfect. Users still have problems, and our best practices continue to change. Users are diverse, just like babies. As they grow up, they don't become all of a sudden completely homogeneous and logical. And the context of the websites that they find themselves in are very diverse as well. That's why I think it's so important to experiment on solutions to solve their problems within your specific context instead of taking a one-size-fits-all approach to UX design. A/B testing is a method for experimenting on your site or app to validate that the UX design and development decisions that you are making are truly best for your users. There's a number of reasons why we do A/B testing at Booking.com and why I think that you should consider it as well. For one, we want to avoid letting HIPPOs guide our design and development. HIPPO stands for the highest paid person's opinion. And I've experienced this in places where I have worked before Booking. And it's really not fun to just implement whatever some person from on high just brings down to you. Of course, my opinion isn't really any more valid than the highest paid person's opinion. It is still just an opinion. I am supposed to be an expert. And I flatter myself that I do know more than some random person on the street about how to make great websites. But I am still one human in a vast sea of diverse people. I am not my users. You are not your users. We all have biases, and we're all programmed to think that our opinions and assumptions and preferences are right. So instead of opinions from experts and highly paid people, the users get to decide and drive the product's direction in meaningful incremental steps. We test everything at Booking.com because even things that we might consider bugs might actually work for our users. And once you've done A/B testing, you can't really go back to saying that you're okay with not knowing if you're actually helping your customers or not. So we end up testing everything. 9 out of 10 tests fail at Booking, even though we are smart, skilled people who are trying to do the right thing. So even if you haven't done A/B testing, you might have experienced this in user testing. How many of you have done user testing? Okay, a few people. And then how many of you, when you've done user testing, have seen users do things that you didn't expect? Basically all of the same hands. And that's because your work isn't perfect. There's always more that you can do for users. And A/B testing is another way, in addition to user testing, to learn if the things that you are doing is actually working for your users. Now, by helping these users, our customers, we help our business as well. They are not in conflict. We don't have to balance their needs against each other. Their goals are the same, at least in the case of our business. They both want to book a place to stay. Users want to complete that task, that's why they come to our site, and that's what we want them to do as well. And Booking.com has been A/B testing for over 8 years. It's a core part of how we run our business, and it's a really big reason why we are one of the largest e-commerce sites in the world. Now, the technical details of how you implement an A/B test vary based on the tool. So I was more interested in sharing the process with you all because I think anybody can apply that to where they work. So the A/B testing process that we follow is we make observations, we formulate a user-centered hypothesis, we create and run the experiment, evaluate its results, and then we accept or reject our original hypothesis. So the first step is to make observations. We gather data about our users' problems by observing them. And I mean data in the broad sense. So our data often comes from previous experiments, but it can also come from other quantitative sources like Google Analytics or from qualitative sources like user research, which I'll talk a little bit about later. Everyone who works on the site has access to the data because we all get to contribute ideas of what we want to change and why, and we challenge and strengthen each other's ideas. Once we have data about the user's problems, we turn it into a hypothesis that we want to test. And the hypothesis can be broken down into 4 parts: why, what, who, and the outcome. So first ask why you want to make a change. What is wrong with the current state of your site or your app? This is where you get to state the data that you have collected that shows that there is a problem for your users. Next, what are you going to change that you think will address this problem? This is your before and after, the current state and what the actual change is that you are going to make. And who is going to get exposed to this change? It's probably not going to be everyone on every page of your site in every condition, so you need to specify under which conditions and in which spots users will get exposed to the experiment. Of course, when you do this, you want to make sure that you actually have the technical capability to track only those users that actually see your change or experience your change. And last is the outcome. This is what you expect to happen to users, how their feelings or behavior is going to change. And how are you going to measure that that change actually happened? What metrics are you going to use, and will they go up or down? Now note that this is separate from and it comes after the why, because you are experimenting to solve a problem, not shift a metric. The metric is not the goal. The metric is a measurement of the goal. So the outcome comes last after you have already stated why you want to do what you are doing for your users. So let me give you a silly example. My work colleague has a friend who asked her if we have a filter on our site for properties that offer personal butlers. And I can tell you right now that we don't collect butlers as a hotel facility right now. But let's say that we did have lots of properties with butlers. And let's say that we ran a user test where we saw that lots of people were looking at 5-star properties and they were struggling to find ones that also had butlers. So this is a user-centered hypothesis that I might come up with based on my observations in this fictional user test. So I could say, based on user testing, where many guests struggled to find hotels with butlers, we believe that adding a butler filter to search results for users searching by 5-star properties will help them find butler-enhanced properties more easily and make them excited to book. We will know this when bookings increase. So this is the 4 parts all combined together into a sentence that hopefully is clear about what we're going to do and why. Now, it's finally time to actually create your change and run the test. We create the smallest change possible that we think will achieve the desired result. This is because most experiments will fail. So if you test small, you limit your investment and your risk. This also means that you need to run a lot of tests to find success. So iterating quickly becomes important, which again, small, isolated changes helps you to do. Also, if you test multiple things at once, you don't know which one was responsible for the success or the failure. So it's harder to learn and iterate from it. Now, sometimes, of course, you have to combine multiple things together for them to make sense and achieve your goal. Just make sure that you have focused the implementation as much as possible. And don't worry, because it's amazing how tiny changes can have a big impact far down the funnel, many pages away from where you actually made the change. Now you need to decide how long you need to run an experiment before you run it, or possibly right after starting if you need a little bit of data. We have a power calculator at Booking.com that we can use to determine the right amount of time to test in order to get statistical significance. But you can use an online power calculator such as this one from Convert.com to find out how many users and days you need to get that significance yourself. So what you do is you put in your existing conversion rate and, or the rate of whatever metric that you are trying to shift, then how much you want to improve it or how much you expect to improve it, then the number of variations in the test, including the base version. So you'll always have at least two, the A and the B. Then how much traffic will be exposed to the test every day. And finally, what level of statistical confidence you want to have in your test at the end. 90% is pretty common. You can set it to something like 95 if you want to be even more sure. And as you play around with these values, you will see that you need more time to detect a smaller shift in your metric, or if you have less traffic, or if you have more variance. Now, you'll probably want to round up the number of days to the next full week, or whatever your business cycles are. So in that example where it said 18 days, we actually would round that up to 21, so we get 3 full weeks. Our business varies by day of the week. Your traffic probably does too. So to get accurate results, we have to run everything in multiples of full weeks so that we get equal amounts of each day of the week in our results and we don't skew our data. For example, if I start a test on a Wednesday, I can't stop it after the weekend because I will miss Mondays and Tuesdays in my results, and maybe people behave differently on those days. I don't know until I test and get that data. So I need to stop on a Wednesday to get accurate data. So here's my fake test with my Butler filter button. The testing tool assigns users who fit the criteria for the experiment randomly into group A, the base version with no change, or group B, the variant, my new version, and then it tracks everything that they do from that point forward. So then you sit back and you relax for your runtime and you let the test go. Once the experiment has run its course and reached the amount of time you decided up front it ought to have, you evaluate your results. Now, looking at your primary metric alone tells you something, but the more metrics that you can look at, the more complete a story you can form about what happened to the users in the test. So let's say bookings go down. I might conclude from that people don't like butlers or people don't like my feature. But maybe also map usage goes down and more users get 0 results and more users change dates. So maybe it's not that people hate butlers, maybe it's just that maps are more powerful in helping people find great properties to stay. So maybe we should run the experiment again, but with the butler filter moved away from the map button. Now, you don't know if this story is true, but it's a new hypothesis that you can now test in a new experiment. Some metrics really make no sense on their own, and they need a lot of context to be understandable and useful. Time on the page is a classic example of this. So if time goes up, does that mean that users are more engaged, they like the results better, they interacted with them more? Or does it mean that they were confused and they struggled to find information, and struggle to make a decision to move forward. If time on the page goes down, does that mean that users found what they wanted faster? They could decide more easily? They had more relevant results? Or does it mean that they weren't interested in the results, or they rushed their decision making and they chose properties that are actually bad for them and they're going to cancel them later or call customer service and complain? So no matter if time goes up or down, I can come up with a good or bad reason to explain it, which makes the metric pretty useless usually. That's why it's so important to focus on metrics that actually matter to your users and your business. For example, increased usage of a feature, your feature, does not necessarily mean that something good has happened. If users use the Butler filter a lot, does it matter if it doesn't actually help them book? We run a lot of experiments that highlight certain pieces of content or functionality that we think will help users. And whenever you highlight something, it's pretty common for that thing to get more clicks. But clicks don't matter if there are no other metrics that suggest that clicking more translated into a better user experience. For example, a couple of years ago, I added this map banner to the top of search results. Unsurprisingly, lots more people use the map. There's a big thing to click on now, which you think should have made me happy since I was on the Maps team at the time, but it didn't, because it didn't help users book. Conversion didn't change. If your meaningful metrics, the ones that you purposely targeted in your hypothesis, are negative, don't get discouraged. Negative experiments are not bad. They are still learning experiences. In fact, they're often better than inconclusive because we have a clear signal on what not to do next. We have a new data source. That's why we have a budget for negative experiments on Booking.com. We know that some of our experiments are going to fail and that we are going to lose some bookings. But this is okay, since we learn from them in order to come up with positive experiments in the future. Finally, we come to the last step, where we accept or reject the hypothesis based on the evaluation that we just did. But remember that just because this implementation failed doesn't mean the concept is wrong. There are tons of ways to implement a concept, and there are more ways to fail than to succeed. So your first try often won't work. Erin Weigel is one of our principal designers at Booking. She has written a great article about this phenomenon, which this quotation is from. So she provides a great list of questions to ask yourself when a solid concept fails, so you can better decide which implementation to try next. Luckily, all the implementations that fail give you data that gives you a more solid idea of what to try next. Even your positive experiments, of course, give you those ideas. So you are not iterating blindly. You are iterating based on data, which takes you back to this beginning of the process where you go around using the data to form new hypotheses and new tests. So fundamentally, it's a simple process, but there are lots of pitfalls to watch out for. So I wanted to talk about some of the don'ts that come along with A/B testing. Don't test something just because you can. The infamous example of Google's 41 Shades of Blue comes to mind here. They tested 41 different shades of blue for their links to find out which of those shades got the most clicks. Of course, it's possible to test an infinite number of colors, but you should have a reason for why you think a particular color is better than another one so that you can test that one against this other one. That's a hypothesis, and a hypothesis is more than just an idea. There's an infinite number of ideas, things that you can test. So you need to prioritize and have a reason for the test that you're running. This is where you use your data and your expertise to decide what is actually worth testing out of all of this stuff that you could be doing. While it can be worthwhile to retest something when you get surprising results, which I'll talk about in a minute, if you test the same thing over and over again, you can magically make a negative experiment turn positive without actually helping your users or your business. So let me pull back the curtain and explain how this magic trick works. Let's say that I love cats, and I want to create a page for properties that allow cats to stay there. So I create a feature for it on the home page. And the experiment is very negative. I don't know this, but all of the dog people saw this and they got offended and they left and they are never coming back. But I don't think the negative result is correct because I'm a cat person, so I test it again. Now, people who didn't like cats the first time, I already said they're not coming back. So they're not included in this experiment. But we have a whole new set of people in this second version of the experiment who never saw it the first time. And some of them hate cats, and they're going to leave and not come back too. And so the second experiment goes negative as well. Now, I can keep tweaking the experiment and retesting it, and each time drive users away who don't like the new feature. At some point, there are simply no more dog people left that have not yet seen the banner and left. Everyone who dislikes the banner has left and is no longer included in my experiments. So, the only users that are left to experiment on will probably like cats, and therefore the latest version of the experiment is going to be positive. It's not that the experiment is actually any better. I have just skewed the results by continually changing the population of people who come to the site, which are the only people that we can actually experiment on. So every time that you want to rerun something that was negative, ask yourself, what if there are some people who are actually really turned off by my feature? And decide if you think it's worthwhile to take that risk. You also don't want to cherry pick your metrics after you run the experiment, but instead focus on your original hypothesis and what you said was going to change, whether it really did change. And only if this happened should you consider your experiment a success. So the Texas sharpshooter fallacy, confirmation bias, and harking, which is hypothesizing after the results are known, all relate to finding data after the fact to support an idea that you want to be true. The Texas sharpshooter fallacy comes from a joke about a Texan who fires some gunshots at the side of a barn, and then he picks the tightest cluster of them, and then he paints the target around that cluster. And he says, "I'm a sharpshooter." So if you don't hit the spot that you wanted to with your experiment, even if you hit some other spot that you think is good, you haven't succeeded. Come up with a new hypothesis and test it by itself to see if you can hit that new something else again, if that result was real. Don't A/B test if you do not have enough traffic to get statistically significant results. So I'm standing here talking about how great A/B testing is, but you shouldn't do it if you don't have enough traffic, because having no data is better than having wrong data. For instance, if I was to ask 3 people in this room, what is your favorite pet? And 2 people of them say cats, and 1 person says snakes, can I conclude that among Polish people, cats are the most popular pet and snakes are in second? Of course not. My data is no good because my sample size is not statistically significant. It'd be better if I just didn't ask that question at all, rather than coming to this incorrect conclusion that's going to lead me down an incorrect path. So again, you need to use a power calculator to figure out if there's a way for you to get significant results with the type of traffic that you have. Even if you don't have enough traffic, you can and should still test your assumptions in some way. We use all of these methods at Booking at various times, some of which you can read about in the article linked here. Some of them are very easy and cheap, or even free, so you can probably find 1 or 2 that will work for your company. And Ida is speaking about easy and affordable user testing tomorrow, so I would imagine she's going to cover a few of these things. If you get unexpected results, like an insanely good boost that you didn't anticipate, you should question whether the effect is real. There's something called Twyman's law in statistics that says if a statistic is interesting or unusual, it is probably wrong. So you want to retest your surprisingly good results. If the result is real, you will get that result again, so you don't need to worry that you're going to lose your great result that you got the first time. You can retest it. If it's real, the goodness will happen all over again. You can also test the same concept in a different spot. So you can test like a successful copy change that you made on a button on your homepage. You can test that same copy on a different button on another page and see if you can replicate your results. And of course, it's always a good idea to validate the results that you got with other data. So that could come, again, from your analytics, or it could come from any number of qualitative sources like the user research ones I mentioned just a moment ago. A/B testing data is better than not knowing anything, but it doesn't tell us everything about our users and our product. You still need other types of research which can give you the why behind the data and drive further testing. None of these techniques or practical matters of A/B testing will work if you don't have a company culture that makes A/B testing possible and powerful. You need to be ready to question the assumptions and validate the opinions of everyone, including the bosses, to democratize your design and development process. Roadmaps become a lot less useful when you do A/B testing because your users are setting the direction. Not only can you not always predict the results of a particular experiment, but you can't fully predict what your site is going to look like a year from now. You adjust as you go along and learn. And this only works if you accept up front that you are going to make some mistakes and fail. But if these failures help you understand your users and their problems better, you'll be better equipped to solve those problems and make meaningful changes that will improve their experience with your product. If you want to experience Booking's approach to A/B testing firsthand, we are hiring for all sorts of roles. If you have any questions about A/B testing or parenting that I can't answer right now, please do come talk to me afterwards or hit me up on Twitter or my website. Thank you very much.